What's going on, guys? Welcome back to the channel. Today's video we're going to continue building out our trip details page and actually allow the user to add notes for their trip. So let me show you what it's going to look like at the end. So if you go into your trip details here, you'll see you can now add a note. So if there's no note here, it'll say click to add a note. If you click this and you type in some cool note, and this will be actually 2 lines. And you can do any number of lines, and then if you hit save here, it'll actually now show that note right there. You'll be able to edit this, so a third, and it'll edit it right there as well. All right, let's get started. All right, so we have the app running here with just 1 trip in it. So if you click into that, you'll see the detail view here, and this is what we're going to start updating down here. So open up the detailed trip view page in the code, and you can see right here we have 2 elements which are actually the sliver fixed extent list, and both of those elements actually have a height of 60. You can see if we make it 100, they'll just be spaced out more. We actually don't really want this because looking in our XD design, these right here are what we're going to be building. So right now we're going to start with doing the notes one, and you can see these are all probably different heights, and even if we had longer notes, we're going to want that to be a longer text box. So go ahead and just change this from being a sliver fixed extent list to just being a sliver list. And what that means is the height will now be calculated basically by the content of the element within the list. So then in this delegate here, which is going to be the content in this array, we're going to keep the title and the padding, but you can even see, like, if you save this now, these will go back up to kind of being in line, and we can leave both of these for now how they are. We're just going to add a new one, which is going to be actually a card. So again, this is going to be, we're going to build this purple card right here, which is just going to have the trip notes, and you'll be able to write any notes you want here. And so let's build out this notes card as its own widget. Let's just call it notes card. And now down here, basically 1 bracket up, we're going to return a widget, which is going to be called notes card. Here we can return the card. And now we're going to just start building out this card. So to start, simply let's set the background color, and then the child element of this is actually, we're going to want this card to be clickable. So let's make it one of those inkwells, which we talked about in the last video. But basically, the inkwell, we'll just make a card clickable. Then this, let's just go ahead and start with a child, or let's go ahead and start with a column. And this really will just be a 1-column card. So inside this column, we're going to add the title, which is going to be text, and it'll be the trip notes. Then we can add actually the trip notes themselves. So if we reload this, you'll see over here we now have this purple card with a title and the trip notes. So it doesn't look exactly how we want it to look. So let's go ahead and start updating some of the style. Firstly, these texts, we can add some style to them. All right, now our title's a little bit larger. That looks good. Similarly, go ahead and update the text, but let's not make it 24. Let's keep it at, let's just keep the font size what it is, and we'll just make the text size bigger. Or I mean, make the font color white. So again, if you do Option Enter on a Mac, and then you could do wrap with row, this is gonna now push the text to the left there, and now we can wrap this row in some padding. And for the padding, I think we're only going to want left and top, but that looks fine. You could change this to only and do, top will be 10, and then left will be 10 as well. But essentially, that's the same. Then down here, go ahead and also wrap this one in a row, and then go ahead and wrap that row and a little bit of padding as well. So now if you save it, it's starting to look a little bit nicer. All right, so we made this an inkwell so that we could click it and edit the text. So right where after the child here on the inkwell, go ahead and add the onTapped method. And this is going to actually we're going to create a new route when we click this, and it will display, we want this whole purple box to take up the whole screen and then allow you to edit the note. So right now, let's just go ahead and print out tapped so we can make sure that this is working. So if you save that and you tap it, you can see we are able to tap this and perform an action here. So what we really need is a new view. So go ahead under our views and create a new Dart file. And we're going to call this the edit notes view. All right, and now let's go ahead and get the basics for this set up. We're going to include a few packages. Firstly, material and our trip. So let's get those in there. Then let's go ahead and make this a state list widget to start, and we're going to call it the edit notes view. And right within this, we already have our build method here. So let's change, instead of a container, let's make this a scaffold. And then our scaffold can have the body of actually a container. We can add the height to this, and we want the height of this view to be the full size of the window, because again, this view is going to be, when we click this, we want basically this whole box to look like it enlarged to be the whole window, even though it is a separate view. So for the height of this, use the media query dot of the context, and then we'll do the size and the height. So the height of the screen. That looks good. Let's also make the color the same color as our background right here, which is this deep purple accent. So that looks good. All right, good. So now this is like basically set up with just the background color. So go back to our trip detail view, and on our on tapped, we're going to want to push this new route. So we do need the build context here, and since this is a widget separately, we're going to need to pass that in from up here where we're calling it right here. So that's basically just taking this build context and passing it down through to get us to here. All right, and this is going to route to a material page route, and we're going to give it that context again, and then here we can actually define this class, this edit notes view. So drop that in there. And we're actually going to want to pass in that trip object that we have here. So this trip object here, it basically contains all the data of our trip. I suppose we really only need to pass in the note object, but if we do pass the whole trip object, then when we save our note, we'll have reference to that whole trip object. So later on, it'll actually be better. So we want the trip to be the trip. All right, and then this is probably going to complain because I don't think we set up over here that we want to pull the trip in. So again, we've done this in the past. Actually, we probably are doing it on this detail page. We can just copy these two lines here and paste them right here. And then the only thing we need to change is this. And this is basically just saying we expect a trip object to come in when we navigate to this view. So this should be good now. Let's save that. Now when we tap this, oh, looks like we might be missing a semicolon there. Oh, and our edit notes view, we need to import that. So up at the top here, just import the edit notes view. And now when we save this and we tap on this, you'll see we go to our edit notes view page, which is just a purple page, the whole width of it. You can swipe back to go back to the trip details page. The animation here is kind of not that great. It's just kind of sliding in from the side. Let's go ahead and add that hero animation that we've talked about in a previous episode. It's actually pretty simple. You just wrap both widgets in the hero. So you're going to wrap this in the hero, and then we're going to wrap basically this entire container in the hero, and it'll give it the effect of this expanding to be the other whole view. So in our notes card here, above the card, just go ahead and wrap this in a new widget, and it'll be that hero widget. And then the hero widget takes, it needs two parameters. So it needs a tag, which needs to be consistent on both of them. So we're gonna call this the trip notes, and then we're going to give it a unique identifier, which for us, we have trip data. So let's go ahead and use the trip title. And that should be pretty good. And then our transition on user gestures is going to be the other one. This one's optional, but it allows you to keep using the swipe back method. And these actually need commas after both of them. All right, so we have that set up on this end. Now in our edit notes view, we're going to wrap our entire, we have our container here, and then we're going to actually give our container a child element, and then give that the hero. And the tag is going to be, again, this same tag. And since we're passing that trip object in, we do have that same data there. And we're going to keep this transition on here. All right, and then the child of this hero widget, we're going to first give it the safe area. And this is because since we're not actually going to have the app bar here, we need that safe area so that, especially on the iPhone, the text or anything won't be up in that top corner. All right, and then the child of the safe area we can put as, actually now we want a single child scroll view because we want all of the content here to be scrollable. And then the child of that can actually be a then it can be a column. All right, that looks a little bit better. You can, by a little bit better, I mean, at least we can see something now. The problem here is the width. So we don't have any width actually set. So this is pretty much just only showing us the width of this one text view. To fix that is pretty easy. We can just set the width. And it can be very similar to how we're setting the height. Obviously, just use width here. And then if you save that, you can see everything looks good. And this new trip here, this text is actually in a location that we want it. It's not up in the corner there. So we need to add a couple commas here. All right, so there's going to be three pieces to this. It's going to be the title heading here, which is going to have a title and an X. Then we're going to have secondly will be the text area, and then thirdly will be the buttons. So let's create those all as three separate widgets and then call them here inside of this column. So the first one will be to build the heading. And that we'll do first. So go down here and we're going to create a new widget, which we can call build heading. And this will start with, we actually want to return, so we're going to just return a widget from here. We actually want to return this as a material widget. And the reason for this is mainly because using that hero widget, you need a material widget here so that it doesn't cause problems within the transition. That's why we are using the material here. Inside this, we can set the color, because if we don't set the color here, this actually has a background, this material widget. So for instance, if we go ahead and just add a child here, which can be text, and it just says the trip notes, and save it, you'll see the background is white, and that's because this material is not using the background of this. So we are going to have to actually reset that background color. So just use color and I believe, yeah, the deep purple accent. There we go. So that will fix that problem. We actually want to add this text inside of a row. So put that in a row, and then the text can be here, and we can just add some slight style to it. Actually, it's probably going to be the same style we put down here. So let's just copy this, which is just increasing the size and the color. That looks good. So now this is going to need some padding. Let's actually put the padding on the row, not the text. And 8 is okay, but let's go ahead and actually, let's do the left padding of maybe 20, and so this needs an only, and then left of 20, and then let's do the top of 10. All right, that looks good. So now within this row, we have our text element, and then this text element we actually want to put as in expanded, so wrap that in one more widget and call it on the expanded one. Let's see if we add a couple commas here, it will format. And again, the command option enter will get you this automatic formatting. After the expanded widget, we're going to add a button over here, which is just going to be an X, which will let you cancel this. Again, you can cancel by swiping backwards, but we also want to have the option to hit that X there. So this is going to be pretty simple. It's just going to be a flat button, and within that, it's going to have the child element, which will be an icon, and then we're going to use icons of clothes, and then this we're just going to need to set the color, which will be white, and then set the size as well to 30. All right, and then we just need to do the onPressed method here, and this, so if you remember, this whole view here is another view, this edit notes view, and back here when we navigated to it, we actually pushed the view on top of our other view, and that's why you can still swipe back, because the other view is actually just one view behind this edit notes view. So to remove the edit notes view, we only need to pop it off. So pop it off of the top view hierarchy here. So it's actually pretty simple. You can just do navigator. We are going to need that context again. So of context, and then we're going to call pop. Now we don't have the context because again, we're building this as a separate widget. So we're going to need to pass the context into this widget, which means when we call this widget up here, we need to pass the context in. All right, looks like we have a problem here with icons. Let's see, the size here should have a colon, and I think that should fix it. So now you'll see we have this X button, and if you click it, it will shrink down our purple view here. So that looks pretty good. The next thing then is to build out the area that's going to have our text field here. So we're going to call that, we'll call that the build the text notes, or build notes text. The name doesn't really matter here, it's just I like to call it start it with build and then pretty much name it what we're building. So again, this is going to return a widget, and similar to what we did with the build heading, we're going to want to return material, a material widget at the top. Within that, we can start building out the widget itself. So again, we're going to need to set that color, or else it would be white. And then here, we're going to actually have a text field. So let's just start with the child of text field, and we'll wrap it in a few padding widgets in a little bit. But the text field, we're going to have set the max lines to null, and this is because we want the user to be able to have as many lines as they want. So null will let you have that. The next thing is the controller. So we're going to need to build out a controller here, which is pretty simple. So actually up at the top here, let's do that right now. Right after this, we can do the text editing controller is going to be called notes controller. And this is just going to be a new text editing controller. And that's it. So now we can use this notes controller as the controller here. We are going to use that in a little bit to set the default text value of this to be the notes value if we have it in Firebase, which we won't right now. We can actually just save this and see what it looks like. So you see we just have like one straight line here, and this is our text field. So let's clean this up a little bit so it doesn't look like that. Firstly, we want to remove the border. So go ahead and use the decoration here, and it's going to be the input decoration, and then simply call the border, and we're going to do input border of none. Saving that, you can see the border goes away. Let's go ahead and make that cursor white. So cursor color will be white. Our cursor is on the very far left here, so we want to add some padding to this. So go ahead and
wrap this in padding, and I think we're gonna increase it to 20 for all the sides. That should get our cursor down here now, which is good. We can set autofocus to true. That should get the cursor always here as soon as we enter the page, which I think makes the most sense. Another thing is the text color. So the text is it's actually black right now, so go ahead and set that with style here, and then we're going to use text style, and it's just simply colors of white. All right, the text is white now. That looks good. The next thing we need is a save button here. So similarly, we're going to build another widget. So we'll build this one. We'll just call submit button. Build that widget right below our notes widget. Really similar here. We're going to return material. We're going to set that color again. And then the child of this is actually going to be a raised button. All right, so this button, when it's pressed, well, I guess first this button we just need to give it a name, which will be a text value of save. And then we're also going to set the color here to be something other than purple. We can do with, let's go with green. Green accent is fine. After that, let's go ahead and add that onPressed method here. And this is actually going to be asynchronous because we're going to make a call to Firebase here. Add the async there. And now basically what we want to do is update Firebase with the value of our string text here. So our string text value is actually going to be the notes controller text. So two things are going to happen. First, we want to save, again, remember we passed that trip object into here. That trip object is actually pulled, I'm not sure if you remember, but it's actually pulled back here. So in the main page of our app, we pull that trip data, save it as a trip object, and now we're no longer talking to Firebase. So when we click on this, we're using that local trip object here of the data that we did pull from Firebase before. So then when we click into notes, we still have that trip object, but it's actually the local object. It is the Firebase data, but it was pulled previously. So basically what that means is if we update the Firebase data here, it's not going to update that trip object on this page because this page is still going to have that local trip object. When you go back to this page, however, this will actually be updated with that trip object's data if we update Firebase. So all that to say, we need to update both the trip object locally so that we can view the differences on this page, and then also update it in Firebase. So to update it locally is very simple. We just need to call trip dot, and we need a new value. So notes is going to be what we're going to use. So the trip notes we're going to set to the notes controller of the text value of the notes controller. So the notes we don't have yet. We don't have notes set up yet in our trip object. So go ahead and open up the trip model, and we're going to add another string and call it notes. All right, great. And a new trip doesn't need to include notes. When we're formatting for uploading to Firebase, this is really just when creating the trip. So we don't need to update this one. When we're pulling the data from the snapshot, this one we do want to update. We're going to want to add the notes on this. So, and again, this is what's going to get that data updated in our local trip object after we pulled it from Firebase. So this right here is basically generating a new trip object locally from the data from Firebase. So we do want that notes object to be included. And those are the only two places we need to add it right now. Good. So now our trip object has a notes field, so that will get saved, and then we can use that later to display the note on this main details page. The next thing is we're going to want to actually update Firebase itself. So a few things we need to do first is to add some packages. So we need two packages. We need our provider, and we're going to need our Cloud Firestore. All right, so there's those two.
We're going to need the provider because we actually need to get the user's unique ID. And if you remember, our Firebase data structure is set up to be specific to the user. So we have a table with a bunch of trips, and we're only going to pull the trips for this specific user that's logged in, and then only let them update their data. So the reason we don't see all the trips in our entire app ecosystem in here is because we're using that user ID to basically to filter those. So we're going to need to filter that here before we update this trip, because that's really what we're going to be doing now. We're going to be updating this trip object in Firebase with a notes field, with the new notes field. But this concept of updating could go towards updating anything. So if you wanted to update the budget, for example, you would do it this same way here. You would just need to have them, type the new budget somewhere, and then when they hit that save button, this type of action is what will update that in Firebase. But anyway, to get that UID is pretty simple. It's we're going to set it as a variable called the UID, and then that's going to equal. This is where we're going to need to await. We're going to need to await twice, actually, once with this because it's a call to the API, and then again when we're actually updating Firebase. So here we're going to use our provider, and our provider, if you remember, just gives us the user, like the user's data. So the provider knows the authenticated user, and it knows that based on that auth parameter. If you haven't set up the auth, if you set up the auth a different way, you might be getting the user's ID a different way as well. But if you were following along with these videos, this is how you can do it. You'll see we're using this context again here. So we're going to need to pass that in through this widget, and again right there. Great. So at this point, we'll have the signed in user's user ID, and now we can use that when updating Firebase. So we need to actually create an instance of the Firebase database, and let's do that up outside here. So after the text editing controller, we can go ahead and set a final variable here, which we're just going to call DB, and then this is just going to equal a Firebase, or actually, sorry, a Firestore, because Firestore is the database we are using, and then an instance of that. Cool. So now we can use this DB instance to start making calls to Firebase. So back down here in our onPressed action for our button, we're going to actually call. We're going to need to use a wait here again because this is going to be making a call to Firebase now. And we're going to use the DB, and we're going to find the collection of, if you remember, our data was structured in a way where we go to the user data collection first. So this user data collection basically has all the users' trip data in it. And all of that is sorted by documents, and each document is titled by that user's UID. So that's what we're going to go with here. We can write these on different lines. It'd be a little bit easier to read. Then after that document, we're going to get the collection, which is the trips collection, and then that trips collection actually is going to have documents in it, and those documents are going to be, this might be easier to show in the Firebase console. All right, so here's basically what we're interested in. So we have the user data is our highest level collection, and then within that, this is a user's ID right here, and then within that we have this trips collection, and then inside of trips we have documents, and each of these documents has a unique ID. And then within that is where our actual data is. So in here is where we're going to start saving that note. So back out in our code again, as we just went through, we've got users data. Then we're going to that the document with that user's ID. Then we're going into the trips collection. And then right here, we actually are going to need that unique ID from the actual trip document, which again is this right here. We're going to need this 7 in random string value, because we're going to need this to find this document and then be able to update this document. So currently we actually don't have access to that document ID. So we're going to need to update our trip model again to add that. So go ahead and just add another string value here. And this will be the document ID. And then this document ID we have access to from the snapshot. So this snapshot right here, this snapshot is a snapshot of that document. So that document that we want the ID of, it is the document ID equals the snapshot, which has a document ID on it. So we just want the document ID of the snapshot itself. So that should be good. Now we'll have access to this document ID. One thing to note, if we are already on this page, it hasn't been filled in yet. So you're going to need to cancel out of this and go back actually to this main page. And then when you click on this, now it's been repulled, if that makes sense. But anyway, we'll have the document ID. We will have the document ID now. So that we can call as trip of the document ID. At this point in our path through our data, we're now here. We're into our actual object that we want to update. So we can pretty much just call update data on it and then pass the data as JSON that we want to update. So call update data, and then here we're going to be, here it's going to be a JSON object, and we're going to do notes. And then the notes are going to be this right here, the text of that notes controller. Great. So now if you save this, you should, and this is just missing that underscore. If you save this, and this actually needs a semicolon, there you go. All the errors are gone now. If you save this, and again, make sure you go back out to this main page just so that you can get the document ID on your object. Because again, that's that local object versus the Firebase object. So our local object now that's loaded should have the document ID. If we click on the notes here and we type some note and we hit save, if we hit save, okay, we're hitting save, and right now actually our data should be saved to Firebase, which you can check by looking at your Firebase console. Here it is. You'll see notes. We have our some notes there. Great, but we're still on this page, which we don't want. So pretty much where we were, what we used for this exit button, where we navigate pop, just go ahead and add that right after we do the Firebase part there. Now, if you save this and you hit save again, it does clear. It brings you back to, it clears out that editing page and brings you back. So test 2 here, if you hit save, it'll close that window out. And then you can see here, it does say test 2. So that looks good. Now, a few things that we need to update still are this right here just still says trip notes. And this right here does not have our Firebase data. Let's go ahead and update this one first while we're in the edit notes view. This actually is going to require us to change our edit notes view from a stateless widget to a stateful widget. So go ahead and hover over this and do Command Enter and then convert to stateful widget. The reason for that is you can't set the text. The text will be a state of this text field. To actually set that, we're just going to use this. The notes controller, which we set, is right here. And we're saying that the note, this is actually notes controller. The notes controller text should equal the widget, basically the trip notes. So if there are trip notes that get passed in, it should say what the trip notes are. But yeah, if you click this and click into there, you'll see that's updated. Enter, updated, save, and you'll see it should save all of that. Great. Now we're pretty much done with our trip or our notes editing, and you'll notice the transition is kind of like slow and janky. I think that's just because of the simulator right here and maybe my computer itself. Also that it's in dev mode, which I think when you put it in production mode, the app runs a lot more smooth. But that's because this dev mode allows us to do hot reload and all that, so it is very useful. Now, back in the detail trip view, we want to actually put that note right here. We want to display the whole note. So basically right now we have the note text set to be, just the static trip notes. So we can go ahead and actually remove this, and we're going to do this as a method because if this is blank, like if we don't have a trip note, we're going to want to put a message there that says, tap to add a trip note. So let me actually just code this out real quick and then show you. All right, so I created this new widget, which is actually a list. It's going to return a list of widgets, and that is just called set note text. So pretty much if the trip notes is null, then we want to return it's going to have an icon here, which is a plus icon, and then it's going to have a message that says click to add a note. If we do have a trip note, so that's the else here, we're going to just return that text that is the note. So right now you can see that the note is, since we do have a note, it's showing up as the actual note, which is what we want. And then the reason this is a list is because this is inside a row, and it's the children object of that row. And the reason for that is because of pretty much because of this icon here. So this needs to be in a row, or else you can't have both of them. And now if we clear all this, I believe it should set that to null, and then we should get our message. Okay, it's not actually setting it to null, it's setting it to an empty string. So if you just go in here and pretty much just delete this whole thing, notes is gone. This is what it would be like if you didn't have a note, and you can hot reload this. Actually, again, because of our local and because of our local object, you need to go back and click this, and it'll say this is what it will say when you first enter this, or if you have no notes entered. So that looks good. I think we're pretty much done here. So if you click this, you can add your note, hit save, everything looks good, your note is there, and it's also right there in Firebase. Great, that's going to be it for this video. I hope you enjoyed. If you haven't already, please consider subscribing, and have a good day. Ciao for now.